Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Clear Cut. I'm Michelle McCory. We begin in Iran, where protests against the regime continue to spread across the country for the third day. This after the government reversed its denials and finally admitted that it did accidentally shoot down a Ukrainian International Airlines passenger jet last week. The Iranian people are continuing to demonstrate against what they call the lies of the ruling mullahs, despite increasing pushback from security forces. Online videos show police firing tear gas and live ammunition to disperse the growing crowds. Videos also show injured demonstrators being carried away. Iran, meanwhile, denies that it's using force. And this all comes just a month after another nationwide protest movement was stopped by the Iranian regime with, quote, shoot-to-kill policies that left more than 1,500 Iranians dead. Well, what sparked this round of protests is Iran's admission that it did shoot down that Ukrainian jetliner, killing all 176 people on board, including 82 Iranians. But the protesters are also revisiting some of the same themes that they've championed during protests inside Iran since 2017. And that includes anger over the regime's continued proxy wars against the United States, Israel, and other foreign nations. And in this dramatic video, first seen on Sunday, we see hundreds of Iranians refusing to walk on the U.S. and Israeli flags painted on the ground in Tehran. Now, President Trump is continuing to show his support for the protesters. A tweet he posted Saturday night in Farsi telling the Iranian people that he always has stood with them is now the most liked Persian language tweet in history. As of now, it has more than 362,000 likes. But the nation's top elected Democrat is not following the same tune. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked whether she or Americans should support the Iranian protesters, and here's how she responded.
We get there. We're seeing now demonstrations in the streets of Iran against the regime. Do you support those protesters, and would it be a good thing if they brought the regime down?
Well, the protesters are protesting, as I understand it, this brand of protesters about the fact that that plane went down, and many students were on that plane, and these are largely students in the street. I think the Iranians should have not had commercial flights going off when there was.
They're calling out the regime for lying. They're saying death to Khamenei as well.
Yeah, well, whatever it is. But the fact is this, there were protesters in the streets before against the regime. After the taking out of Soleimani, there were protesters in the street joined together, as you know, against us. That wasn't good. Taking down this plane is a terrible, terrible tragedy, and they should be held accountable for letting commercial flights go at a time that was so dangerous. But there are different reasons why people are in the street.
Meanwhile, in just a few hours, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is set to meet in Silicon Valley with a number of top tech company executives. He's expected to enlist their help in U.S. opposition to the Iranian regime, and that could include asking them to help restore the internet service that the regime often blacks out to stifle protesters, and also to shore up safeguards against expected Iranian cyber attacks. Joining us now with more is our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. All right, Mike, we've got 3 days of protests. Where do things stand now?
These protesters are pushing things to the brink. You have to understand, as you mentioned, reports that 1,500 protesters were killed a few months ago in the last round. Those were economic-related protests. For them to have the courage to go back out on the streets knowing what happened last time is pretty amazing. And yet, we're not only seeing them taking what is reported to be live fire in the streets, ripping down posters of the assassinated Iranian Revolutionary Corps commander Qasem Soleimani. They're going right up to the offices of the supreme leader in Tehran and protesting in front of the offices there. They're pushing this as far as they will be allowed to do so. The Iranian police saying, we learned our lesson from the last time. We're not using live fire. But as we've seen on video over the weekend, a woman drenched in blood saying she was shot by live fire, tear gas obviously being fired. It's being documented right now. In addition to this, we're seeing journalists resign en masse. One Iranian state journalist, there is no independent media there,
right.
A state television anchor said, I'm sorry, went on publicly, I'm sorry for lying to you, my countrymen and women, for 13 years. I'm done. We've seen it now from the Tehran Journalists Association saying we're sorry, and we're seeing a lot of journalists now calling it quits they say we don't want any part of what's going on here.
Mike, needless to say, Israel is watching this very closely. There are some reports that it was Israeli intelligence that may have helped the U.S. pinpoint General Qasem Soleimani when he was taken out.
Not so much to pinpoint, but to confirm what others had already told the U.S. It is apparent that there were workers at the airport who were aware that this flight would be coming into Baghdad. There were also members of the airline that may have been spying on Soleimani that reported this, and it got back to the United States. Israeli intelligence confirmed what the U.S. thought it already knew from these spies and the workers at the airport, and there you have it.
Now, Mike, when you see these Iranian protesters actively choosing to not trample on the Israeli flag and the U.S. flag, it's not that they've discovered some newfound love for Israel. It's that they're telling the regime, we're tired of you deflecting. We're tired of the proxy wars. What's your read on that?
I think it's exactly spot on, saying take responsibility. It's time for accountability within the regime. It's always somebody else's fault. It's the fault of the evil empire. It's the fault of the Zionists. Basically what they're saying is, listen, we understand Iran is not loved around the world. We understand that others may cause problems for us internally, but you, being the supreme leader, being the police, being the government officials, have to start taking some accountability. As Nancy Pelosi said, they probably shouldn't have a plane flying around in the skies in hostile territory there when there were military operations going on, than to lie about it, to try to cover it up. Iranians are sick of the corruption. They're sick of the lack of accountability.
They probably also shouldn't be firing missiles from their own soil at Iraq. A clear act of war. Mike, thank you so much, as always, for your analysis. Mike Wagenheim. All right, let's get more perspective and analysis on these angles with tonight's opening panel. Joining us now is Iman Foroughtun. He is the chairman of the Board of Trustees at the Iran Liberation Congress. Ryan Ball, Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, and Ryan Morrow, director of the Clarion Intelligence Network. Thank you all for being with us. Ryan Morrow, let's start with you. What is the message that these protesters are sending? What exactly are they demanding?
Well, very clearly, they are demanding a change in the Iranian regime. I mean, they absolutely want it gone. And if you look at the demographics of Iran, it's actually not that surprising. Only half of the country is actually what you would call Persian. The rest are oppressed minorities. So right off the bat, you have half the population that detests the regime and is among the most oppressed. But then with the remaining half of the Persians, the majority of those people have come out in protest at some point or another point. And so you're looking at a regime that has maybe maximum 20% support. And I think that's a high estimate. So this regime is going to fall one day, and we need to start preparing for it.
Ryan Ball, do you think that the regime is near collapse? What do you see in terms of response from Tehran?
Well, at the particular moment that we're looking at here, the Iranian government has shown a remarkable amount of unity in spite of all of this knocks to its legitimacy that it's been facing. Soleimani's death was a big blow to insiders. This shoot down and then the step back that they've had to do of admitting that they did that, that's also a big admission for them. And yet, in spite of these setbacks, we're not seeing the key cracks that we need to see within the security forces, the police, the army, the Artesh, as it's called, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, or the political establishment that would create that space that would allow for an uprising like this to really have an effect on the region.
All right, Ryan Moore, Ryan Ball, Iman, stick around. We want to get more analysis on the story when we come back. Keep it here. This is Clear Cut. Once again, our top story. Anti-government protests across many locations in Iran continue tonight, and that is despite security forces using tear gas to disperse those demonstrations. There are also, again, reports of live ammunition being fired at the protesters. Of course, the regime used a shoot-to-kill policy against protesters in November and December of last year that left at least 1,500 Iranian people dead. Let's get back to tonight's opening panel. Iman Foroughtun, Ryan Ball, and Ryan Morrow. Iman, from the perspective of the protesters, these tweets from the president praising their bravery and encouraging them, what impact are they having?
Hi, Michelle. The impact is immense and enormous. This is the first time in the last 40 years since the Islamic jihadist regime came on that a U.S. president has this directly has supported him and also tweeted in Farsi supporting him. This is huge for them. And as I told you earlier, and I can talk about it when it's time today, the other shoe is yet to drop. This plane was shot intentionally due to the state secrets on it. I have the name of the two people that were on it that were not supposed to leave Iran, and much more.
Wait, Iman, you're saying that when the regime says it was an accident that they took down this Ukrainian plane, that was not, in fact, the case, that this was an intentional act by the Iranians?
That's actually exactly what I'm saying. If you look at my tweet last Tuesday, about an hour or so after this plane came down, that's what I said. So this is what we know from two independent sources from inside Iran, if I may. This plane, some say that already taxied, but definitely was delayed for about an hour or so before it took off. IRI security forces went on the plane and by force removed 4 passengers. We're not sure exactly who, but we're told that one of those 4 was probably a high-ranking Sepah IRG person fleeing Iran. Then they found out that there was 2 more on the plane that should have not been there. They've had secrets, and they've had close contacts with Soleimani. That's when the kill order and shoot order came. We have further information that we tweeted a few days ago. The government then ordered firefighters and gave them a lot of Basij forces. They confiscated their phones, and they went ahead and started cleaning up a crash site, followed by a bulldozer before anybody else was supposed to come in or come in to investigate. We also have some good information that the black box was connected to some very high voltage whatever, hoping that maybe they can destroy that or the chips inside it. This is what we know. I also read today, I haven't confirmed, that the Ukrainian Prime Minister had said that many of the luggage of the passengers were not loaded to the plane when it took off. So this is, as you know, I'll pause right here.
Well, Iman, certainly some of what you said regarding the plane crash we've already verified as accurate, including the regime destroying the evidence. But you're making a serious allegation that this wasn't an accident, that this was intentional. To be fair, Iman, you've been on this show before, and you have given us insights into Iran from your sources on the ground that have proven to be accurate, contrary to what was being reported at the time. Ryan Morrow, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, that as Iman is saying, perhaps this was an intentional act by the Iranian regime to shoot down this plane because of some state secrets on board. What do you think, Ryan Morrow?
Well, I don't put anything past the Iranian regime. They're as evil and deceptive as you can possibly be. I need to hear a stronger reason as to why they would actually do this, and at the same time do such a poor job of doing the cleanup afterwards, because as much as they tried to do the cleanup and hide all of this from people, they didn't do a good job of it. And so I would imagine if they deliberately shot this down, there just would be better preparation. But maybe they just are that incompetent. I don't know. I would need to hear a better rationale for them doing this.
All right, Ryan Bull, I won't put you on the spot and get your perspective on this, but I do want to get your thoughts on what we can expect in terms of support from the president. He has told the Iranians that the U.S. is watching. He's warned them against killing protesters. It seems as though they're not exactly heeding those warnings. Do you see the U.S. stepping it up in any way beyond the president's tweets?
Well, this is an open question. We can assume safely that the United States is carrying out psychological operations and intelligence warfare within Iran itself. We know the Americans are preparing plans to potentially restore the Iranian internet if it's shut down again. All of these are key ways to wage information warfare inside of Iran. That would be the most salient way the United States could take a low-risk action to undermine the Iranian government's legitimacy at this sensitive time, without necessarily moving us back into that war risk scenario that the president is obviously quite anxious to avoid in the run-up to the election.
Iman, let's focus on the protests and the president's support. What do they want to see coming from the U.S.? The tweets are good. They're encouraging. The sanctions are certainly putting the squeeze on the regime, and the regime has taken out one of Iran's top terror masterminds. But are they demanding anything more when the president says that he supports them?
Right away, just to clarify, obviously we do not have 100% confirmation that it was intentional, but putting all the information together and other information we have, chances are very high this happened. With regard to the tweet of the president and what people of Iran want, people of Iran have always asked for a moral support more than just a few words here and there from the president of the United States. I believe what President Trump yesterday tweeted and asked the Iranian government, don't kill your people, open the internet and let the human rights representatives inside Iran to report freely. That is one of the reasons that we have yet not seen massive killing of the people. And I believe if people have the internet and if they know the world is watching them, they will take the matters in their own hand and they'll bring down this regime as we had anticipated for the last few months. I think the end is very close.
All right, Iman, we do appreciate you sharing what is yet unverified reports, but we appreciate you sharing your intelligence with us as you get it. And as I've said, your intelligence has proven to be accurate in the past. Ryan Morrow, the Europeans have practically ignored the reports that in November the protests resulted in over 1,000 people killed. What is going to get the Europeans to take tougher action against the regime, considering it did, in fact, shoot down a Ukrainian jet, either accidentally or potentially intentionally?
It's very obvious that the Europeans are driven by business interests. So once it becomes clear that the Iranian regime is about to fall, if there were to be an Iranian government in exile formed, the Europeans would probably switch and then start trying to get ahead on business deals with them for the new government that came in. It is true that there have not been splits within the regime in terms of defections coming from security forces or the ruling politicians at the moment, but that can happen very, very quickly, especially when the security forces are using live ammunition, which is why I'm urging that we prepare for that eventuality of a regime implosion or a civil war, something like that. We've got to start preparing for that right now, and also bring back cold warriors who know how to non-violently, preferably, undermine the regime in the ways that we've been talking about. And I'm also disappointed that we're not hearing about Iranian activists going in and out of the State Department, the National Security Council. According to the reports out there and what I'm hearing from Iranians, that type of engagement between the Trump administration and Iranian opposition figures still isn't happening. So I am concerned that there could be a deal struck one day between the regime and Trump, maybe to cut back on their nuclear weapons program or something like that.
Well, Ryan Moore, to be fair, the president has actually said it several times that the goal of the Trump administration is not, in fact, regime change. Iman, going back to you and the protests on the ground, is there an organized opposition? Who is organizing these protests? Is there a viable alternative should the regime fall? Who's ready to step up?
I'm glad you asked that. First of all, 3 or 4 days ago, Secretary Pompeo made a very, very important order to State Departments. He basically listed 5 separate opposition groups, including MEK, Kامel, the Kurdistan Free whatever. Some of them that are known to be violent. Some of them are known to actually want to break up Iran. That State Department personnel are not supposed to speak to them anymore. In fact, there have been a lot of attempts by others to go and talk to the State Department. On the other hand, Iran Liberation Congress, along with about at least 9 or 10 other organizations that are democratic, they all believe that at this point, even though there is not one united leadership, they all believe that there's only one person who can bring everybody together, and that is the ex-Prince Reza Pahlavi of Iran, not for him to become the new king, but he's someone that over the 40 years has shown that everyone from a pro-monarchy, a pro-Republican type of organizations, they believe that he can be the catalyst to lead the Iran past Islamic Republic until the new constitution of Iran decides what form of government the future of Iran will hold.
Ryan Bull, very quickly, do you see regime change as potentially a viable path forward here at this point?
Well, we might say that regime's behavior change is most likely at this point. The Iranians have to take into account all of this pressure and the damage to their legitimacy, and they need to find a path out of it. Until we see the regime crack, it's unlikely to collapse. But we are likely to see the Iranians pivot and try to find a new strategy going forward to fend off all of this pressure both within and without.
All right. We will, of course, continue to monitor the story. Thank you so much, Ryan Morrow, Ryan Bull, and Iman Foroughtun. Appreciate it.